Hello friends, today we are going to learn about Google Cloudnet, which stands for Network Address Translation. If you already know what NAT is and what it stands for and why you should use it, then you can just skip ahead and see the hands-on demo where we will set up the Cloudnet on GCP. But if you are new to the concept and if you need to just understand the basics, hang in here. And we will go through the theory and then we will do the demo. So let's get to it. So what is Cloudnet? So for a minute, forget about Cloudnet, because NAT, or Network Address Translation, is not proprietary to the cloud or GCP or AWS or Azure. It's a networking term, right? So if you understand the concept behind NAT, you will see that the same concept applies to any cloud or even the on-prem NAT, if you want to understand that, right? So basically NAT lets you access internet from certain resources. When I say certain, I mean infrastructure as service, infrastructure as a service resources, like your virtual machines, or in cloud you have cloud functions, or your cloud run services, all those things, right? At the end of the day, they all are, even though they are serverless, they are still infrastructure, right? So it allows you to access internet from the workloads that you deploy on your infrastructure components, right? So if you deploy an app on a virtual machine, or on your a GKE cluster, or you're running an app on Cloud Run, or if you wrote a function, and if you deployed something as an app engine, on App Engine. So in order to access internet from these services, you may need a NAT. Why do you need NAT, right? So think of it as when you create a virtual machine, right? A simple term. When you create a virtual machine, you get two type of IP addresses, private IP and public IP, right? In order for your virtual machine to access internet, you need public IP. Without the public IP, you cannot reach internet. Okay, so when you deploy an when you deploy a virtual machine, or your Kubernetes cluster, and if all the nodes, if they do not have a public IP address, and if you try to reach internet from those resources, it will fail. You can't do that, right? Why will you create these resources without public IP? Well, it's to increase the security, right? So just like without public IP you cannot reach internet, same way without public IP nobody from the internet can reach to your resources, right? So if you create a virtual machine without a public IP, of course now it cannot reach internet, but at the same time it is secure, because nobody from the internet can reach to your IP, to your virtual machine, right? So it has its own benefits and it has its own drawbacks, right? So you will find that in the large organizations, most of their virtual machines that you deploy, they'll be deployed using only private IP. They may not have public IP address, right? Because they do not want internet traffic to reach to their virtual machines directly, right? So in that scenario, you try to access anything from the internet from those virtual machines, it is gonna fail, right? But let's say you want to run yum update, or Windows update, or you want to do something, you want to reach to the internet and download some packages, right? Without public IP address you can't, right? So NAT allows you to access internet. It's a one way. It allows you to access internet from within those resources without having public IP address, right? Still, you create NAT does not mean that the traffic from the internet can reach your servers, right? So you still are protected, in a way that there is no incoming. It's only one way, it is outgoing. So you go to the internet, you fetch the updates and you download the updates, and it's all done. But nobody can initiate the inbound connection from the internet to your virtual machine to SSH, or if you have a website or something running there, they can't directly reach your EC2 instances, right, or your virtual machines, right? So that is the reason you want to use Cloudnet, and or the NAT. And it doesn't really have to be Cloudnet. Cloudnet is like a managed NAT, right? So you basically can just create a virtual machine and make it work as a NAT. But then because it is not managed, you have some drawbacks. And what are the drawbacks? You will see in the next slide. But think of it as Cloudnet is a managed NAT service provided by Google Cloud. I hope this clears out the concept behind NAT. Okay, now let's see why you want to use Cloudnet, right? So, like I said, you can technically create a virtual machine and configure that virtual machine to be used as a NAT as opposed to using a Cloudnet. But why you want to choose to create or use Cloudnet as opposed to creating your own virtual machine, right? So of course, security, it applies two ways, right? So you can reduce the need of your individual virtual machines to have external IP address, like we discussed in the earlier slide, that your virtual machines does not need to have external IP address or public IP address if you are using NAT and if you want to access the internet. Okay, now using Cloudnet, you can get high availability, right? So because you are using managed service, making sure that that service is up and running is Google's responsibility. It's not your responsibility, right? So you are avoiding single point of failure, right? So if you create a virtual machine and use that as a NAT, and if that virtual machine goes down, now all the virtual machines that are relying on the outbound connection and are relying on that NAT virtual machine to be up and running, now they will lose the connectivity, right? So everything is down, right? You do not want that. Okay, you want to have high availability. You want to remove the operational aspect of your resources as much as you can, right? Of course you end up paying little more, but it is definitely worth it. So that is one of the reason why you want to choose to create Cloudnet instead of creating your own virtual machine and use that as a NAT instance. And of course scalability, right? So if you have hundreds of thousands of virtual machines, and if they're all trying to update themselves at the same time, and if you are using your own virtual machine, that virtual machine which is acting as a NAT may not be able to keep up with all the traffic, right? And it will either crash, or it will just delay the updates and all that kind of stuff, right? So if you are using Cloudnet out of the box, Cloudnet will scale for you. Okay, you do not have to specify the scaling parameters or anything. So if you are if you have thousands of virtual machines trying to download the updates from the internet, and if you are using Cloudnet will automatically scale for you. You don't have to worry about that. So these are the benefits of using Cloudnet over creating your own virtual machine and make it work as NAT instance. So this is why you want to use Cloudnet. Okay, now that we know what the Cloudnet is and why we should use it, and what are the benefits of using Cloudnet as opposed to using your own VM as a NAT instance, we are gonna do a demo where we will create Cloudnet. We will set it up in such a way so that our virtual machines should be able to access internet and download the updates without having public IP or external IP address. And then we will look at the scenario where we want to use we want to use a specific IP address for a NAT instance, and I will explain why you may want to do that at some point of time, but it's a scenario just to showcase some of the capabilities or things you can do with the NAT. So with that being said, let's get on the GCP console and let's get it done.